So today we're talking about consequences in parenting. So we're going to talk about, is are consequences something people should be doing at all? How far should we take them? Are consequences different from punishment? Is there a time and place for consequences? When is that time and place? When is it appropriate? When is it inappropriate? We're going to be talking all kinds of peaceful parenting regarding consequences today. So yeah, I'm gonna ask my co-host here, Paul, to introduce himself in just a moment. But first, if you don't know who I am, my name is Luke. I'm a peaceful parenting coach, and so I help parents who are struggling with misbehavior, tantrums, disobedience, backtalk, disrespect, the whole gamut. If parents struggle with it, I help them with it. And yeah, I just you know, somehow God put it on my heart, and I just really care about the kids. And I've made it my life's work so far, at least, to do what I can to equip parents to be the best parents they can, and so that kids can live the best, most healthy life that they can, so that they grow up to be as healthy and functional as possible. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about who I am. Paul, how are you doing, man? Would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us, how old are your kids? What's your experience been like so far? Why should anyone listen to anything you have to do regarding parenting?
Oh, that's a really good question to start with, Luke, and thank you very much for your intro there. Why should listen? Who am I, and why should people listen to me? So, yeah, really valid question. Uh, who I am? Well, I suppose I'll throw a few labels out there for those of you who haven't come across my work before. I'm a senior engineer and I'm a product manager. I work a professional engineering career, which in the earlier parts of my life, I guess, was my reason for being. I had a career. I was focused on myself, as many of us are, as we grapple with what this life is. And I suppose as the years rolled on, I found a certain quality of life was revealed to me as I kind of uncovered my own childhood. So by dissecting my own origins, I found a liberation in life that that was uniquely rewarding. And just as you said there, and by the way, I feel quite honored to be in this discussion with someone who views the world in the way you just described. I think that's quite rare and very valuable. So I'm grateful for that. So yeah, so my one of my passions now is the liberation of the next generation, and that has kind of many subtopics, I suppose. And I've found that peaceful parenting is the absolute uh, ultimate vehicle for achieving that. And as a possible subtext to my introduction too, I possibly come with a bit of a unique perspective to the parenting. So I view peaceful parenting through the lens of ultimately the relationship between the individual and the state. So as we grow up, we take a lot of the things we learned and were modeled in front of us in childhood and apply them in the real world when we wear our big boy pants, right? And I find, I mean, maybe this is a topic we can get into when we talk about consequences, but I find that a lot of the problems we experience now in the world, particularly with the use of force and the might makes right kind of approach, are already problems that were baked in the cake decades ago. When the parents of those who inflict these traumas today were themselves traumatized. So unraveling that sequence and as you said before, Luke, offering people a better path is just dry. It just gives me a reason to get up in the morning. So that's a little bit about me, and yeah, looking forward to getting into the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I completely agree with you that parenting it just it just does make such a huge difference on who people turn out to be, and consequently who what kind of governments they are sympathetic to and vote for, and the kind of politicians people become. And so yeah, it's a essential topic, and I would even argue it extends not just to politics, but kind of to every relationship we have and how we interact with all people, and really our whole philosophy on existence and worldview. I mean, how you parent will influence everything, right? If you're some distant or punitive disciplinarian, your kids will view the world in a completely different way than if you're this kind, caring, gentle kind of soul and caretaker for your kids. So yeah, absolutely. I'm I'm really glad that that we agree on that. So yeah, let's oh, first, we're going to get into consequences and parenting. First, I just want to ask everyone listening if you can go ahead and give this space a retweet. The more people that are in here, the longer we'll go and the more value we'll give. And yeah, so if everyone in here can go ahead, like and retweet the space so that your audience can jump in and be a part of this valuable conversation. And so you can share value with your audience, that would be awesome. And you'll get more value for that. So yeah, with that said, let's get into consequences a little bit. So first of all, what is a consequence? Let's start by defining our terms, right? So a consequence, in my thinking at least, is anytime a parent is, I guess, or anyone is trying to influence someone else, by way of after we'll just stick with parenting. After your kid has done something, you're going to do something to try to incentivize them to not do that thing again. Or I guess positively, you might want them to do it again, but usually it's in the negative sense, right? So if, pretty similar to a punishment, right? So if you don't want your kid to, you know, walk around the house with muddy shoes, if they do that, you might give them a consequence of saying, all right, no TV for the rest of the day if you walk around the house with muddy shoes. That's, a random example of a consequence, right? Just so we all know what we're talking about. Okay. So as far as peaceful parenting goes, how does peaceful parenting square with consequences? How does a peaceful parent think about this idea of consequences? And so yeah, for those who are not super familiar with peaceful parenting, it's the idea or the philosophy, the parenting philosophy, that we are, as much as humanly possible, we're going to try to not use force with our children. We're going to try, we're not going to be spanking them. We're not going to be, forcing them to be in timeouts. We're not going to be, snatching things out of their hand, or raising our voices, to the absolute maximum that we can. We're trying to avoid these things. Now, sometimes there are necessities, there are emergencies, there are dangers, and of course, we're going to step in and make sure no one's getting hurt, right? But it's the idea that we're going to be as peaceful as we can, and it comes from this idea of the non-aggression principle, and it's this idea that it's actually immoral to initiate the use of aggression or force, or you could say violence, or whatever word you want to use. It's immoral to initiate the use of force. Um, you know, of course, out and we say initiate because we're not including self-defense. We have a provision there. It's okay to defend yourself. To use force to defend yourself. And so in parenting, we can extend that idea to say we can defend our children if they're about to hurt themselves, right? Or if they're about to hurt someone else, we can step in and say, no, I'm not going to let you hurt someone else, right? Okay, so consequences. What does that have to do with consequences? What does peaceful parenting have to do with consequences? So the way a peaceful parent sees the world, we're not punishing, right? We understand, a peaceful parent understands that kids, some of the primary ways they're learning about the world is from their parents' example, and how parents are modeling things. And oftentimes they just aren't going to understand consequences. And let me break down consequences even further to two categories. So there's natural consequences and there's unnatural consequences. And so primarily, I think kind of the more punitive form, where it's kind of more behavior modification, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, that's more of an unnatural consequence. And I guess I should make this distinction more clear. So an unnatural consequence is something that doesn't really have a logical connection. So, like what I was saying, if you walk through the house with muddy shoes, you lose your you lose TV for the rest of the day, right? So there's no logical connection between muddy shoes and TV. That's not like something that makes a whole lot of sense. And let me it might help to understand what I mean by a logical connection, if I tell you what an example of a natural consequence. And so a peaceful parent, at least in the way I see things, does use natural consequences, right? And so we're talking do's and don'ts. Here's the do's, right? In my opinion. And so a natural consequence would be, okay, you know, you've got your t-ball bat, your big plastic bat that you use to hit the t-ball with. If you're going to be swinging that around, or if you hit anyone, or if you're about to hit someone, I'm going to take the bat away, right? You could call that a natural consequence. It's saying if you're showing that you're not able to responsibly handle the situation that's going on and handle the responsibility of having the big foam baseball bat, then I'm going to give you a natural consequence by saying, yeah, I'm not going to let you hurt people. And I actually do like to use that kind of a phrase. And I'm very intentional not to do any shaming, not to say, oh, you bad kid. I'm not saying you've been a naughty boy, or whatever. I'm going to avoid negative labels like that, and I'm just going to say, hey, I'm not going to let you hit your sister right now. And as much as possible, I do like to prepare kids, or my kids, ahead of time. And okay, you can play with the bat, but if you hit anyone, I'm going to take it away from you. And if I see him thinking about it, I'll say, hey, buddy, remember, if you're about to hit someone, I'm not going to let you hit them. I'm going to take the bat away from you if you hit someone, or if it looks like you're about to, right? And so I like to as much as possible, we're preparing our kids ahead of time for challenges and temptations that they might encounter, and yeah, just making it clear, and avoiding kind of the I don't know, malice isn't the right word, but the kind of anger that can easily kind of boil up. Um, I know, I know sometimes I see parents, they see their kids, crossing those lines, um, and they get angry. They get angry about it, and they kind of lash out. They kind of raise their voice, and they, make this uh, big scene out of like snatching the bat out of the kid's hands, if we want to stick with that example for now. And, you know, and it doesn't have to be that way. Kids, almost all of the time, in my understanding, they're not being malicious. And I'll let you give your thoughts in a second, here, Paul. I promise I won't talk the whole time. But yeah, the kids are almost never, in my understanding, being malicious. They're not like sitting there, rubbing their hands together, plotting about, ooh, how can I be an evil little boy, and how can I ruin everyone's day and cause the most pain I possibly can. Like, no, they're just like, well, wouldn't this be fun if I did this? Oh, I haven't done this before. Why don't I try this? And parents, I think, can so easily get caught up in this idea of, he is blatantly disrespecting me, right in my face, looked me in the eyes, and then disobeyed me. And it's like, well, maybe there's more to the story than that. And I don't think that's a good faith interpretation of what's going on. Even if you did tell him not to do something and then he did it, that doesn't mean he was this bad boy, and that he's just evil down to the core. And maybe he just experienced a temptation, as all humans do, and gave into it, right? I mean, when's the last time you were, yourself as an adult gave into a temptation, right? You're trying to eat healthier, and then you got a soda, or you ate some ice cream, or you had a bag of chips, right? And it's like, okay, so are you just a terrible person because you gave into a temptation? And in the same way, it's like kids, they have little temptations. They have urges to do things that they shouldn't do, just like you and I do. And guess what? You and I, we give into temptations all the time. Unless you're different than me. If you're perfect and you don't give into temptations, then ignore what I'm saying. You can disregard it. But yeah, kids give into temptations, and that doesn't make them terrible people, right? And we don't need to shame them for it. It's just part of being people, and we can give them grace, and we can show them some love. And so, yeah, that's a couple of my thoughts. Paul, did anything that I said spark any ideas in your mind? Do you any directions you want to take things in?
Oh, absolutely. My mind is on fire. It's a big thumbs up, Luke, there on everything you've said from my point of view. And there are many threads we could pull at there. That snatching the bat, not being malicious is such a simple statement, but it really unravels one of the core principles, I think, of peaceful parenting, and And you mentioned another key one before as well about um, how you parent will influence everything. And that's not just hyperbole, that's so true. And it influences yourself as well. And I'll unravel some other threads as well as we go along. But that one really jumped out at me because I'm in my personal life going through, I suppose, a situation with my parents that I think is the ultimate manifestation of how I was treated as a child, and in my opinion, somewhat poorly, although many had it worse, I'm sure. But there's this beautiful symmetry to life. You know, how you treat your children when power is on your side and you have the ability to snatch the bat or make your will manifest through force will ultimately come back to each and every one of us ourselves when we're frail and old, and the lessons that we've modeled to our children reflect back on us. There's a beautiful symmetry to that. So that's one, but perhaps it could be superficially viewed as a self-serving motivation, but I think there's a beautiful symmetry in nature about that. So it absolutely influences utterly everything, and that reveals itself slowly as you journey down the path of peaceful parenting. And I think you nailed it too when you used the word incentivize. You know, we are what we're trying to do here when we talk about consequences is nudge or incentivize a behavioral change ultimately. And you're quite right. Like we have this conflation of consequences with some negative kind of outcome. And one of the problems with that is our brains are very complex instruments and they wire up cause and effect in obscure ways. Now, one of the the journeys I've, or one of the topics I've had to really address and confront in my life as I've peeled back the layers of my childhood is what cause and effect wiring has been implanted in my brain subconsciously without perhaps me being aware of it, and how is that exploding now in my or not serving me well in the way I parent and the way I interact with other adults as well. You know, when you rely on uh, methods that aren't peaceful, you are playing with fire with the brain's natural cause and effect wiring. And you know, the go-to example with this is, you know, when a parent draws a conclusion and relies on emotions, as you stated there. You know, we are bringing our own baggage to how we parent, and so you have no idea how that will affect the child. It may incentivize them to change their behavior in a manner that suits our bespoke traumas or preferences or whatever. But how has that been achieved? You know, the muddy shoes, you know, maybe the children don't run around with muddy shoes anymore, and that makes you happy. But are they running from violence? Have they internalized that this is just an unstable person that I need to get away from? And is my skill set as a child based on avoiding confrontation that may erupt unexpectedly, or is it through a true internalization of how it affects other people? So some great threads to pull out there. And as an engineer, I might just add that I love how you started with definitions. I might attempt one at my own if you don't mind. And so I've been thinking about this concept of consequences in the under the umbrella of peaceful parenting, and I think consequences are approached quite radically differently from the traditional punitive methods that we're possibly all familiar with. And there's an emphasis instead on connection, empathy, and I think teaching and guidance rather than punishment or control. And by no means does that mean that consequences are absent. In fact, I think they're crucial. It's just that their nature is different, and they're applied with careful consideration. So what does that mean? Well, I think the carefully considered bit is a big one, and for me, it means removing the emotion of the parent from the interaction, and what you're left with then is a more natural way for the brain to wire up that cause and effect, without that kind of disruptive, you know, what wildly unpredictable emotional component that may be mixed in with that from the parent. And I feel as parents, you know, one of our objectives is to model the real world that our children will eventually face, and consequences are an unavoidable part of life. And so yes, hence consequences have a big place in peaceful parenting. But yeah, like I said, they're used as teaching tools rather than punishments. Um, so I've got a few characteristics I think are relevant to consequences in peaceful parenting. I'd love to hear your take on this, but uh, I think they have to. directly relate the child's behavior or action and help them to learn responsibility and that cause and effect relationship, it necessarily in a safe and supporting environment. And you mentioned that too with the lack of using conclusions and labels like you're lazy or like all of that is visceral and personal. And I think if you can display that emotional regulation, you're on the right track. Because as soon as the situation devolves into emotional responses, you're not teaching what you think you are. I love that breakdown with the natural and unnatural consequences. You know that's that's a good categorization to view that emotional interaction through. You know, you when you think of perhaps a consequence of forgetting your coat is you feel cold. Well, there's no emotion in that. That's the natural world exerting its properties on you. And that same approach, I think, if we use that lens through the ones where there isn't that obvious logical consequence or connection, like you mentioned, that it's obscure that muddy shoes and no TV are linked, but without they are actually linked, perhaps not in an obvious way though. You know, they're linked in terms of if you disrespect someone else, eventually there's a cycle in life, right? And you'll receive some karma back. And that's something we need to demonstrate to our children to prepare them properly for the real world. And if we help them, if we position our goal as helping our children behave honorably in the absence of observers, then that requires internalizing these lessons themselves and not just avoiding punishments. So, yeah, I could possibly relinquish the mic here because I get a little loquacious. I've got a few other thoughts as well, but happy to see where you want to take it from here.
Yeah, no, and I love these points that you're making. And yeah, I think yeah, you mentioned yeah, consequences are incentivizing our kids to do behaviors that we want them to do. But also and you mentioned like eventually consequences just are the real world. It just is what happens. And I 100% agree with that. And it's kids just need to learn what happens when they make certain choices. And we can just a lot of the times they don't need any kind of punishment, they don't need any kind of consequence. A lot of the times kids just need to have these dots connected for them. And so we can just tell them, hey, if you push people, if you hit people, they're not going to like you, they're going to get really upset and they won't want to be your friend. So if you want people to be your friends, you should probably not hit them and push them, and you should probably share your toy with them, and use your manners and say thank you, and be gentle and be nice with people, right? And so we can teach them natural consequences without giving and imposing consequences. And so that's another angle here that I think is really important to point out. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people like there's value in behaviorism, but I think a lot of people get into hyper behaviorism, and they think parenting is nothing but punishing and rewarding kids to get them to do what we want. And I think if that's your view on parenting, that we praise and we reward good behavior and we punish and we shame bad behavior, I think you're just missing completely how humans really operate. And people aren't just behaviors. People have motivations and desires. And, it's actually a very Christian idea to look at the heart of why people are doing things. What is their motivation? What do they truly love? What do they truly care about? And it's not just looking at the surface level legalism. Did you technically follow the rules or not? But it's, are you following the spirit of the rules? And I think that's really important in parenting. We have to realize it matters what our kids think about what they're doing, and it matters why they're doing things, not just that they're doing things. Because if we're giving consequences or punishments in a harsh way or in a not very gentle way, um, oftentimes kids are going to be learning lessons that we don't intend. They're going to be learning, oh, my dad is kind of a jerk, or I can't trust my mom with my mistakes. I they're going to be learning that we're not trustworthy people. We're not safe for them to be their true honest selves around. But if we're being gentle, if we're saying, hey, by the way, when you do this kind of a thing, this is what is inevitably going to happen. And I just wanted to share that with you. I'm not going to beat you over the head with it. I'm not going to lecture you for an hour about it. I'm not going to give you this huge punishment or this big shame. I'm just, hey, I just want to let you know this is what happens. And that's kind of the way that I like to think about things, helping nurture our children's heart regarding a topic. Because we don't, I mean, what kind of a person does the right thing just because they'll be punished if they don't do the right thing? Like, I don't think that's the kind of person I want my kids to be. I want my kids to be good people and to do the right thing because they love people, because they're kind, because they love seeing other people be happy, and that brings them joy. And you know, I mean, even doing everyday, not so warm and fuzzy kind of activities, like I want my kids to do the dishes because it's important to have clean dishes, right? It's important to, you know, feed the dog because we want the dog to not be starving, right? Like there are important reasons to do things that are important to do. And so instead of, you know, if you say, you know, if you don't if you don't do the dishes, I'm gonna give you XYZ punishment. I'm gonna take away your electronics or your video games if you don't do the dishes. Well, they're not actually learning to do the dishes because it's important to do the dishes. At the end of the day, they need to learn to do things because they're important to do, right? We call that intrinsic motivation. And when we use consequences or punishments, we're using extrinsic motivation. And what will happen inevitably is one day they'll grow up and they won't live in your house anymore, and you won't be there to give them punishments, to give them consequences, and they're going to say, well, if I don't do the dishes, what's going to happen? Well, I won't get a punishment, and so they won't have built that muscle of intrinsic motivation, of internal motivation. They won't have that understanding to lean on and to leverage in their everyday life. And so it's actually really, really important that people learn to be nice because of all these things that happen when they're nice, that they learn to do their chores and to be polite because of all the things that naturally happen when they're polite and when they do their chores. And so that's just kind of those are kind of my thoughts. And I'll pass the mic to you in just a second here, Paul. I did want to remind everyone, if you do retweet the space, more people will come in. And the more people that come in, the longer we'll go, the more value we'll share with everyone. So just a humble request, you know, everyone please retweet the space so that we can give you the most value that we possibly can. Because we won't go a whole lot longer if not too many people are in here. But yeah, please retweet the space. And so, Paul, I wanted to pass the mic back to you. What are some of your thoughts going bouncing around in your head right now?
Yeah, look, that's so true, isn't it? When you said there, when the children eventually grow up and leave home, and they find out that nothing bad will happen to them anymore, at least not from you when they don't do the dishes, then the chickens have really come home to roost, haven't they? And unfortunately, that's one of the savage aspects of life, is by the time people realize that the hard way, the opportunity is passed to do something about it, you know, and that's that symmetry of life that I talked about. And it's just wonderful we have the opportunity to help people get on the right path here, I think, before that eventually happens. It got me thinking what you were saying there. I actually jotted this down as you were talking. I've written down here, good parenting is downstream from achieving a moral and well-regulated position in the world yourself. I think that's the first step. And I describe, you know, a little bit about my journey into peaceful parenting. And it ties into what you were saying about that behavioralism, that people aren't just behaviors. That's really an astute observation. You know, kids aren't a different species. They're human beings without life experience. And yeah, just it there's an element of universality to this. When you view kids as future adults that you're entrusted to guide, um, a lot of this kind of falls into place. And a good kind of, to bring it to something practical, a good, as we would say in Australia, a good pub test, you know, a good kind of benchmark or rule of thumb is that would you behave with an adult in this way? You know, obviously there are some tweaks that you make when you're talking to kids. You might use less sophisticated language. There may be more reiteration than is normal with adults. But, you know, in the whole, is this approach I'm taking with my child in line with how I would approach an adult relationship? Because if they're different in kind, then what are you modeling? Then you're on that well-trodden path of of using force again, I feel. But if you're relating to them in a way that will ultimately serve them as an adult, I think that's a good kind of rule of thumb, that universality component. And part of universality is we should allow our kids to pull us up on our own transgressions. If we set a framework for uh, a moral and civil environment in the home, and we say this is what this means, and these are the type of behaviors that we strive to emulate, and this is the stuff we avoid, then when we invariably fall short of those ideal standards, as we inevitably will, because we're all human, as you mentioned before, then we should allow our kids to help us. And I've got an example of this. Sometimes when I get frustrated, my daughter comes to me, and she's only just turned 4. She comes to me and says, "It's okay, Dad. I understand you're frustrated with whatever it is, and maybe you could do this instead." And she started a conversation. She's empathized. She's seen that, something's frustrating me, and she's decided to approach me and ultimately reiterate what I've provided her with in some past frustration that she's experienced. And I just think that's just such a rewarding mirror into how far I've come as a personal kind of check and balance or feedback. And I absolutely grab onto those moments because I allow her to pull me up. Hey, you're frustrated, or hey, you're doing whatever it is that you've taught me not to do. And it gives me an opportunity to go, you're right. Thank you for that. This is why we should choose option B instead of option A. And it's a great opportunity to bond. So yeah, that guidance component, I think, is just key to the concept of consequences. Instead of punitive measures, we just are providing a firm framework of guidance and set boundaries in a positive and constructive way. And again, I keep coming back to needing to do the self work to be able to remove the emotion quite explicitly from a scenario, from the muddy boot scenario where it's so easy to just get triggered. And that helps kids learn from their mistakes without associating moral judgments, with the negative experiences. And I've got another example, actually, as recently as this morning. We've recently been having trouble with my 4-year-old daughter. Well, maybe not trouble, but she's taken to talking over conversations. Now, that's not going to serve her well as she grows up. General polite society doesn't look kindly upon someone just walking in and talking over a conversation. And so that needs to be modeled at home. The appropriate feedback needs to be modeled at home. So, I looked at, and I'm sure they're keen on your take on this, but just recently, as I said, just as recently as this morning, I kind of took a few approaches to this. And one of them was, do mum and dad talk over each other? And that can be phrased as a question, is that something we do? And if the answer's no, then great, you've got an opportunity to say, well, why are you doing it? And go down a line of inquiry. If the answer's yes, then great as well. Your child's given you some wonderful feedback that you can change yourself. It wasn't yes, thankfully, but and then the second point is, well, as you said earlier, Luke, well, this is what happens when you engage in this behavior. When you talk over people, then they get frustrated and they don't want to hear what you have to say. And you can relate that to a familiar feeling that we've discussed before, so that frustration emotion, our daughter understands what that is. She can say the word quite competently, and you can link that, the cause and effect wiring in the brain. You can remember when you felt that frustration and how uncomfortable it was. That's what you're causing in other people when you talk over them. And then the third approach that I took, or the third step, was again that guidance or that educational thing. I'm talking to a future adult who just lacks the life experience tools. So I suggested an alternative. Maybe you could just tap one of us on the leg and say, "Excuse me, can I speak next when you're finished?" So here's a tool. And I kid you not, 3 times since offering that suggestion this morning, she tried that out. Almost as if she had a new shiny thing, a new toy, and she wanted to play with it. She had this new kind of way of injecting herself into a conversation, which was very pleasant, actually, and it worked for all involved. When I was in the middle of a sentence, she politely tapped me on the leg and said, "Could I speak next?" I said, "Of course, darling. I made sure to wrap up the sentence pretty quickly and then moved my full attention over to her, gave her eye contact. What would you like to say? So there's that, this tool, this approach gets you someone's attention in a positive way. So that was just a kind of practical, somewhat successful experience I had just a few hours ago. So yeah, keen to hear your take on that.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that, and I love that it was so successful that she was so excited to try it out. That's awesome. Yeah, no, and by the way, for anyone listening, I do actually have a whole course where I lay out all of the very practical tools to help parents that are just feel struggling, and they just don't really know what to do, and they're kind of in over their head. I have a course, kind of introductory to peaceful parenting. If anyone's interested, just go ahead and DM me. Just DM me the word course, even if you're listening to this later, and I'll go ahead and share some details of that about you, details with that to you, with you. But yeah, my thoughts on that. So, um, you know, the your general take, I love it. I really only have the slightest tweaks that you could make, but I mean, if it's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But generally, my approach is if there's a recurring problem, if the child is old enough to have this kind of conversation, generally, I'd like to, and it sounds like your daughter might be a bit articulate, so maybe she is she is up for this kind of a conversation. But I start out without any judgments, without jumping to any conclusions about why they might be doing things. Not that you did, but and I would just say, hey, I've noticed that you do this thing, and I just wanted to ask, what's up, right? So I avoid the word why. I don't say, why are you doing this, right? But I genuinely would like information about why this kid is doing this thing. And because you can't solve a problem that you don't understand, right? And so if we, and it is a bit more straightforward with this example, but if the kid, isn't doing their chores or they don't want to brush their teeth, maybe there's some kind of a reason that you might even assume you understand, but maybe deep down there's something that you don't completely get. If a kid doesn't want to brush his teeth, it might be that, well, he knows that his bedtime's soon and he doesn't want to go to bed. Or it might just be because he really hates this new toothpaste. Or it might be because, you know, he doesn't like the way this toothbrush feels on his gums. Or it might be that he just doesn't like to sit still for 2 minutes straight. There's endless numbers of reasons why a kid might not want to brush his teeth, and so it's important to figure out why. And we can't solve the problem until we know what those reasons are, right? So that's the first step. It's just asking the kid, hey, I've noticed that you tend to kind of barge into conversations and talk over people. What's up? What's going on? Can you tell me what's going on there? Really in as gentle and friendly and non-judgmental as a way as possible. And after you get all the information you can out of them, and if they're younger, it might take some guessing. Is it this? Is it this? Is it that you just have this thought and you just can't wait to share it, and you just ask it, or is it that you didn't notice that we were talking, or is it and you can play the guessing game until they say yes, yes, that's it, right, that's right. And so the next step after you gather some information is you share your concerns and you say, okay, I understand that you don't want to brush your teeth. We can stick with the your example here. I understand that you're barging in because you didn't even realize that we were talking. Well, my concern is that if you keep barging in and talking over people, they're gonna get upset and they're gonna get frustrated. Because that's how would you feel if you're talking with someone and someone else just randomly interrupted you and started talking over you? That'd be kind of irritating, right? That'd be a little annoying. And so, just explaining your concerns as best as you can, um, and all those natural consequences that we're talking about. And then if we're gonna do this structured framework, just I guess just to help think about it, but it works practically too. The next step would be, all right, so we have your concerns and we have my concerns. All right, what kind of solution can we come up with that meets both your concerns and my concerns, right? So it's not just the parents' concerns. It's not just this kid needs to brush his teeth. So, okay, I know the solution. I'll just force him to brush his teeth, right? That's not actually solving their underlying concern. If it's as simple even as, oh, I don't like the toothpaste. Well, we could just, get some new toothpaste, right? Just forcing a kid to brush their teeth if they hate the toothpaste isn't actually solving the underlying problem, and they'll keep resisting you if they really do hate that toothpaste, right? And so let's find a solution that we both like. And if they're older and if they're up to it, you can invite them to kind of brainstorm and come up with ideas first. And then, of course, they might come up with some ideas that, don't work. You know, well, if I have something, I'll get your attention and then you'll just let me talk, right? Okay, well, you're still interrupting me, right? Um, or, like the solution, it sounded like you made something like, okay, if you really want to say something, go ahead and, tap me on the leg. And then I'll let you know that I heard you by placing my hand on your back. And then as soon as I finish, my thought or a couple sentences, or, after a couple minutes at the longest, I'll turn to you and I'll give you my full attention, right? Is there any reason that that wouldn't satisfy one of your concerns? And maybe there is. Maybe she said, well, what if it's an emergency? What if someone's gonna about to get hurt? Do I still have to wait? It's like, okay, if it's an emergency, and we can define emergency. If someone is about to get hurt, if someone's about to break something or smash a vase or fall down the stairs, yes, you have my full permission to interrupt me. And you can yell, Daddy, it's an emergency, and I'll immediately jump into action. Okay, right? And so we can have this back and forth where we're making sure everyone's happy. We're having a peaceful negotiation. We're not using force. No one's getting punishments if you don't do this. It's just, hey, there's some reasons why we need to not be doing certain things. I have concerns. I'm being very articulate about why these concerns are important and why you should be concerned about them too. And I'm also very concerned about what's going on in your head. And I want to make sure we're actually getting to the underlying reason that this kind of thing is happening. And so, yeah, that's kind of a long, drawn out way of approaching that kind of a topic. So, Paul, I'd be interested to hear how that bounces off of your brain. What do you think?
Oh, this is the point of the conversation, Luke, where I get really excited. Yeah, you've demonstrated a pathway there to really some of the, how do I put this? There's almost a, the proverbial pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that most parents never see. There's some magical moments in parenting that if you earn them, they're just so rewarding. I'll get to what I mean there. But first, you mentioned your course, and I wanted to use the opportunity to, I guess, encourage people to consume more of your work. I know you run the Peaceful Parenting Academy, peacefulparentingacademy.com, rather, excuse me. And I enjoy reading your newsletter with useful tips, and so I certainly encourage people to sign up to that, and it's wonderful stuff. But yeah, that's and thank you for that tweak, by the way. So what you described there, I guess, was a generalization or a sort of checklist, and I was kind of thinking as you were talking, and I make the commitment to literally doing this myself today when we get off this space, is I'm going to write your steps there and put it on the fridge, because I try to do what I suggest other people do in life as a general thing. So that when you get into these situations where you are called upon to remove emotion and go through a process in usually what is an easily triggered emotional state, hey, a checklist to refer to can be a really useful thing. So that information gathering as step one that you talked about, and focusing on the curiosity, is just so crucial. And as you said, you might assume that you understand what's going on with them, but how do you? And that brushing the teeth, how it may be correlated in their mind with bedtime. And there's the brain wiring again, that we don't understand how our own brains are wired up, let alone someone else's. So that genuine inquiry, I think, has a dual purpose. Firstly, it forms the basis of the rest of the steps, but secondly, it diffuses things. If you have the option of being reactionary and acting on the conclusions that you've drawn ahead of time, versus, okay, I'm going to explore what's happening here, then that I think de-escalates. And the second point there is sharing concerns is a wonderful one. That goes back to the definition of terms in a way that we started this space with. is, well, this is how I view things, this is how you view things. But the really exciting thing was the solution bit that you got to. And when you were describing that, it reminded me of another example. And yes, our daughter's beautifully articulate in a way that surprises even us at times, her vocabulary. And there's a week or two ago, there was one of those pots of gold at the end of the rainbow that I spoke about just before. So when you practice the steps that you just outlined, and you get to that solutions one after having defined the standpoint of each party on equal grounds, then you have this wonderful ability to turn lemons into lemonade, so to speak, because it becomes an activity. How do we solve this problem? Now, I've had experiences before, essentially running through what you described there, more or less, except without the formality of the kind of checklist approach. And our daughter came up with I can't recall the specifics of the situation, but I recall the emotion around the outcome. She understood our separate viewpoints to the extent where she offered a potential resolution that I hadn't thought of. And instead of going down the auto no response, if you evaluate every proposal that's put in front of you, it was actually a really elegant thing that she proposed. Again, I wish I could remember the details, but I certainly remember the pride of experiencing our youngster say, well, you want this and I want this, what if blah? And it might have been, suggesting an order we do things in or something. I can't remember, but I remember saying to her something like, you know what, I would be happy with that. That's a great idea. I think we're both happy. And it's just one of those magic moments. And there's another concrete one that pops to mind recently, where our daughter likes to strip down to her underwear, basically, and run around imitating a cartoon character she likes. And I often, find that scoping that behavior socially can be challenging, in that, you don't want her stripping down to her underwear when you're out, in the yard or the garden, and, where more clothing is generally, expected. And there was an instance where she wanted to strip down to her underpants and run around and play this game. And before I even commented, she said, we were actually in the garage at the time. We had the doors up, and I was cleaning out the garage. And she told me, this is what I'm doing. And she said, how about we close these garage doors so I can play? And I asked her, do you want to close the garage doors so I don't get upset with people seeing you in your underwear? And she said, yes, so that way I can play. And I thought, wow, she's actually anticipated from our past discussions the type of maybe objection is too strong a word, but the standpoint I would have on it, and offered, a preemptive mitigation that I just thought was wonderful. I said, okay, darling, that'd work fine, and so, there are real world tangible rewards, I feel, that come from the type of processes, that Luke and I are advocating for here. And yeah, I just get such an organic boost when I hear you talk about these things, because they're not just academic, they're really demonstrable in the real world. And I love that methodical approach. As I say, I'll be putting it on the fridge later today, the steps, so you can easily go through it. And yeah, I just hope that other people out there will themselves discover the pure ecstasy of those types of pot of gold moments in parenting.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I appreciate the kind words. And I try to break things down in as practical a way as possible. And by the way, for everyone listening, I do want to say everyone should go and follow my co-host here. If you're listening to the recording, his handle is at Paul G Conlon, and you all should go follow him. As you've heard, he's a wonderful guy, and he's got great thoughts to share. And you all should follow him. You won't regret it. But yeah, another point I wanted to share, that is really important actually with this whole process, is we you talked about trying to kind of remove the emotions, or I forget the exact phrasing that you used, but when we're feeling triggered, when we're feeling upset, and it can be really easy to slip into doing things or saying things that we regret to our kids. And what's really important to help avoid that, one thing you can really practically do is not take on these conversations in the heat of the moment, right? So if it's in the middle of when your daughter is talking over you, that is not the best time to say, okay, well, let's figure out the best way to handle these things in the future. And let's go through this whole long process, right? I would not recommend that. I would say generally, um, generally, if you haven't prepared your kid for a situation, and that's the way I frame it. I mean, if your kid is somehow not able to handle something, as the parent, it's your job to teach them how. So to a degree, it's kind of your fault that you haven't equipped them, right? Not to get all judgy or anything, but anyways, if they aren't equipped yet, if they don't know what to do, I just lean towards, okay, this one time I'll give you what you want. I didn't tell you the rules of engagement. We haven't worked this out, so I'll go ahead and I'll listen to you right now. But I note in my head that I'm going to circle back to this later. So whether that time is, bedtime or, you know, while you're in the car driving or, at the dinner table, like whenever is convenient for you to kind of sit down and have these kind of conversations, it's a lot easier to have a cool head and to have these rational, calm, uh, empathetic kind of conversations than if you are in the heat of the moment. All right, you're talking over me again. I've told you not to do this 15 times and you're still doing it. Oh my. Okay, we need to figure out why this is happening. Like, no, I definitely recommend not doing that. Just letting it go in the moment, circling back, having that conversation when you're both in a great state of mind, you're both cool headed. It can even be the next day, whatever it needs to be, so that you're 100% just zen and ready to have a rational conversation. Because in the moment, even the best of us can say things we regret in the heat of the moment. And so that's one big point I wanted to share there. But yeah, no, it's we're about an hour in. I guess we can start to wrap things up. Paul, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share? Any last parting thoughts for us?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose one of the big takeaways from our chat here and in general is that this is a journey, right? And we'll all trip over as parents. That's inevitable. It's human. But if you can walk the path that ultimately leads to healthy, thriving adults who want to be around you voluntarily, then that's inherently valuable, and not to beat yourself up when you get it wrong, or that's how we learn as well. And one of the closing points about emotion, because I know I've kind of driven this point a couple of times about this concept of removing emotions. I think you qualified that quite well when you said from the heat of the moment. So that the emotions need to be absent when the learning occurs. Now, I think an important consideration there is emotions are fundamentally intertwined with life. The key is not to be ruled by them. We use them as tools. So we equally can't model emotionlessness. We can't walk around as automatons. And my wife and I make sure that we d- have discussions about things that we might not see eye to eye on in front of the children, and it's civil and it's backwards and forwards, and we're constantly modeling how you can find common ground with people. So yeah, the objective is not to remove emotions. It's to understand them and pick, as you say, pick the right time. And it's relatable as well. As I said earlier in the conversation, I could reference what frustration was because our daughter had experienced it before. And so yeah, that they need to be invited guests in the house. Emotions need to be invited guests in the childhood home, I think, and not that uncle that barges in and eats everything from your fridge, perhaps. So and just as another final personal takeaway, I find bedtime is a great opportunity to do that kind of revisiting. It's a nice bookend of the day. I find it's a great chance to wrap up the day, reflect on what's been learned, what was fun, what wasn't, and a good opportunity to associate a pleasant, bedtime story and some discussion time together to that's a nice regular kind of bookend where you can have an emotionless, or in terms of negative emotionless space to reflect on these things, and then the next day is new. So, oh yeah, so thank you so much, Luke. I love conversations like this. Always keen to uh, help improve the lives of children and parents alike. I think they're inextricably linked, and I think by becoming better parents, we live more valuable lives ourselves, which is just one of those uh, natural beauties in life. I think that is unfortunately hidden in plain sight for many parents. So yeah, really appreciate what you do and the opportunity to chat about consequences today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that point that you're making about, yeah, the way I like to view emotions is they're valuable information. That's what fundamentally, if you want to think about it, I guess in an engineering kind of way, a very practical kind of way, emotions are information. And if you're feeling angry, it's because you feel like there's been some kind of injustice, and so we should be aware that maybe there's an injustice happening. If you feel happy, it's information that things are going well, right? If you're sad, things are not going well. If you feel pain, it's because, oh, something's wrong with my body that I need to give attention to, right? And yeah, we need to be in tune with our emotions. We need to not be shunning them. Yes, yes, absolutely, they need to have a seat at the table, they need to be welcome, and we need to give our kids the vocabulary to be able to name their emotions. And we just need to be careful not to be ruled by them, right? And just be dragged around by them, and victims of them, and letting them control us, rather than saying thank you for your information, and I'm going to note that down for later, and we're going to talk about that. um, yeah, I think that's great. And yeah, once again, everyone, go ahead. I highly recommend you go follow my friend here, Paul. His handle is at Paul G Conlon. And yeah, if anyone's interested in that parenting course, if you just want to get that introduction to peaceful parenting, if you really could use some practical tools, if maybe you were raised in a punitive household, or that's the only thing that you've ever known is timeouts, or maybe spanking, or giving unnatural consequences, if you just want to know, like, what in the world even is there besides punishments, or just bribing kids, or whatever, I'd be happy to share everything in as practical a way as possible. And that's how I designed the course, is to be as helpful and practical as possible, and to provide as much value to you as I can, and to help parents raise their kids to be, happy, loving, functional kids, and to help just build that bond, and preserve that bond, right? And so, thank you for joining, Paul. And I really enjoyed this. So thanks for doing this with me, Paul.
My pleasure, Luke. I'd be happy to do it anytime. The feeling's mutual, and have a lovely Florida evening.
Alrighty, see ya.
Thank you. Cheers.